In 2022, a 25-year-old woman named Sharaban wanted to escape personal and family issues in her life. So she devised a crazy plan to fake her own death and searched social media for lookalikes, eventually stumbling upon a German beauty influencer named Khadija who closely resembled her. After promising the model free beauty treatments, Sharaban kidnapped her and stabbed her 56 times before leaving the body in her car, attempting to pass it off as her own. The influencer was initially misidentified as Sharaban until DNA testing revealed the disturbing truth, as her horrific plan resulted in life in prison. Australian woman Noella Rukunko became famous in 2015 after crashing her own funeral. She was presumed dead after her husband paid several hitmen to kill her upon wrongly suspecting that she was cheating on him. But instead, the hitmen spared her life since they knew her brother and refused to kill women or children. They revealed her husband's plot to her before providing all the evidence and helping her fake her own death. Days later, Noella walked into her own funeral that was organized by her husband, causing him to faint on the spot. He was later arrested, confessed to the crime, and sentenced to 9 years in prison for incitement to murder. When legendary baseball player Ted Williams died in 2002, his head was cryogenically frozen by the Alcor Life Extension Foundation so that he could potentially be revived in the future. But according to a former employee, his severed head was badly mishandled and allegedly used for batting practice with a wrench inside of the lab. Alcor has denied these dark allegations. In Washington state, a man tried to heat up a lava lamp on his stovetop for unknown reasons. The lamp exploded like a grenade, sending a shard of glass into his chest and puncturing his heart. He was found dead on his kitchen floor, surrounded by wax and broken glass. In 2016, a woman from China was found mummified inside an elevator at her apartment complex. A power outage had shut the lift down and no one realized she was inside. After power returned, no one checked the elevator for more than a month, and at some point she likely died from dehydration. When maintenance workers finally found her body, her hands were completely mangled and claw marks were found inside the elevator, as she desperately attempted to pry the doors open to free herself. In 2015, Denise Huskins was kidnapped from her boyfriend's California home by a masked intruder before being held for ransom. She was taken to a remote location where she was blindfolded, drugged, and raped multiple times over the next 2 days. When Denise was suddenly released, police accused her of faking the entire story like a scene straight out of Gone Girl. They mocked her during press conferences and labeled her as mentally unstable, until evidence finally surfaced proving that everything she'd said was true. Her kidnapper turned out to be a former Harvard-educated lawyer who had a history of stalking couples. This still frame is from the collateral murder video released by WikiLeaks, captured moments before U.S. Apache helicopter pilots opened fire on local civilians and journalists in Baghdad 2007. The footage, which includes audio of the pilots making casual jokes during the attack, was leaked by whistleblower Chelsea Manning, who was subsequently sentenced to 35 years in prison, though this sentence was later commuted. No charges were ever filed against the military personnel involved in the incident. This has to be the strangest disorder I've ever heard of by far. Body integrity identity disorder is a rare neurological condition that causes the patient to believe that one or more of their limbs does not belong to them. This sense of disconnection often begins in early childhood, with sufferers reporting an intense and persistent desire to remove or disable the offending limb. Some patients become so distressed that they attempt self-amputation, using power tools, shotguns, or dry ice to damage the limb beyond repair. Renowned cricket historian Roland Bowen famously severed his own leg in 1968 while suffering from this disorder, and in the late 90s, Scottish surgeon Robert Smith controversially performed amputations on healthy patients who begged him to cut off one of their limbs. In many of these cases, patients report an indescribable sense of relief and psychological alignment following the removal of the unwanted limb. For them, the amputation is not a loss, but a long-sought correction in the harmony between their physical form and internal identity. Eminem's track Brain Damage was inspired by his real-life childhood bully, D'Angelo Bailey. In an interview, Bailey once boasted about beating Eminem so severely that it caused a concussion, bleeding from the ears, and temporary vision loss. In 2001, Bailey tried suing Eminem for slander over the song, but the case was thrown out by the judge, who delivered the ruling in the form of a rap. This photo from 1977 shows a Rhodesian soldier interrogating a group of captured rebels. The men had to hold this position until they talked, and the first one to fall would receive a bullet in the forehead. In 1982, 7 people in the Chicago area randomly dropped dead after taking cyanide-laced Tylenol capsules. The incident changed packaging laws forever, but the killer was never caught. In 2021, a 39-year-old man was reported missing in Barcelona. Days later, his rotting corpse was found stuck inside a papier-mâché dinosaur statue located outside of an abandoned movie theater. He'd somehow dropped his phone inside of the statue, crawled in to retrieve it, got stuck, and died upside down. This is why you should never trust a pair of twins. In 2008, Swedish identical twins Ursula and Sabina Eriksson suddenly sprinted into oncoming traffic on the M6 motorway in London. Ursula was struck by a truck and Sabina by a car, yet both miraculously survived. But as paramedics tended to them, they both violently resisted help, with Sabina screaming, "They're going to steal your organs." She then punched a baffled officer and tried to run into traffic again. Ursula was hospitalized, but Sabina was released the next day despite continued erratic behavior. Just hours later, Sabina encountered a man who kindly offered food and a place to stay, only for Sabina to stab him to death the next day before jumping off a bridge while fleeing from police. Despite fracturing her skull, she survived yet again and was later sentenced to 5 years for manslaughter. There was no evidence that drugs or alcohol was involved in their sudden strange behavior, as the incidents have been chalked up to an episode of shared psychosis. After leaving the hit sitcom Different Strokes and struggling to find success as an adult actress, Dana Plato spiraled into addiction, poverty, and run-ins with the law. In 1991, Dana entered a Las Vegas video store with a pellet gun and demanded all the money in the cash register, after which the flabbergasted clerk called 911 saying, "I've just been robbed by the girl who played Kimberly on Different Strokes." Dana soon lost custody of her only child, was caught forging prescriptions, and attempted to salvage her career by posing for Playboy, but found little redemption. By 1999, she was a faded star clinging desperately to the hope of a comeback, but her appearance on The Howard Stern Show turned into a public humiliation. Stern and his callers openly mocked her claims of being sober for 10 years, with some cruelly suggesting she was just moments away from another downfall. Within 24 hours of the interview, Dana died alone from an overdose of prescription pills at the young age of 34. In 1918, Austrian artist Oskar Kokoschka commissioned a life-size doll of the love of his life Alma Mahler after the end of their affair. He requested that it be constructed with swan skin with the feathers still attached, and stuffed with sawdust, cotton wool, and horsehair to mimic the softness of flesh. He even asked for anatomically accurate features, including a mouth with teeth and a tongue, and specified that the doll's intimate parts be perfect and luxuriant. The result was apparently so lifelike and disturbing that Kokoschka's butler suffered a stroke immediately upon seeing it. It's illegal to save baby sea turtles from predators if you don't have a permit. So if you ever see this happening before your eyes, you must let nature take its course unless you're willing to risk jail time. Why? In 2001, a 6-year-old boy was undergoing a routine MRI scan in New York after surgery to remove a brain tumor. While he was sedated inside the machine, a metal oxygen tank was accidentally brought into the MRI suite, where the powerful magnetic field violently pulled it across the room. The tank struck the boy in the head with devastating force, fracturing his skull and causing brain injuries that were fatal. Jeremy Renner's snowplow accident in January 2023 proved to be even more graphic than initially reported. While attempting to assist a stranded vehicle near his home, he was suddenly pulled under his 14,000-pound snowplow, which crushed his body with so much force that he later recalled hearing the crunching of his own bones. Renner sustained 38 broken bones, a collapsed lung, severe cranial trauma, and required extensive reconstruction with metal plates in his chest, legs, and face. Among the most horrifying details he later revealed was that the impact had dislodged his left eyeball so severely that he could see it sticking out with his right eye. Despite the injuries, Renner remained conscious throughout the ordeal, fully aware of his condition, and at one point attempted to write what he believed would be his final words to his family. The actor has since regained much of his physical function, thanks largely to his daughter's support and his own relentless determination to continue living. During a match in Germany in 1993, star tennis player Monica Seles was stabbed in the back with a 9-inch kitchen knife by Günter Parch, an obsessed fan of her rival Steffi Graf. Parch was infuriated that Seles had overtaken Graf as the #1 player in the world, and admitted that he wanted to injure Seles so severely that she couldn't play tennis for a long time. Following the attack, Seles took a 2-year hiatus from pro tennis and never fully regained her prior dominance. The attacker received a suspended sentence with probation and psychological treatment, a verdict that sparked widespread outrage across the sports world. In 2019, a French man accidentally killed his friend during a fight and in a panic stuffed his body under his mattress. To avoid suspicion, he slept on it for nearly 2 years while regularly spraying air fresheners and bug repellent to mask the stench. He was eventually caught when the odor became overwhelming for his neighbors. In 1984, California man David Burke was fired from his airline job for a petty theft, so he smuggled a loaded gun onto the flight, shot the pilots mid-air, and deliberately crashed the plane into the ground, killing all 43 passengers on board. Investigators later found a note in his pocket addressed to his former boss stating, "I asked for some leniency for my family, remember? Well, I got none, and you'll get none." Actor Michael Berryman was born with ectodermal dysplasia, a rare genetic disorder that left him without hair, fingernails, or sweat glands, stripping him of the body's natural ability to regulate temperature. His striking appearance made him a fixture in horror films, most notably in The Hills Have Eyes, which became a life-threatening ordeal to film. Shot in the Mojave Desert, Berryman was forced to endure heavy costumes and layers of makeup under a merciless sun, all while his body lacked the ability to sweat or cool itself. He later described the experience as grueling and admitted that without strict precautions from the crew, he could have easily collapsed and died from heat stroke during the production. For years, Ray Brent Marsh, operator of the Tri-State Crematory in Georgia, failed to cremate hundreds of bodies entrusted to him. Instead, he left 339 corpses scattered in the woods, stuffed into sheds, or piled into vaults. Some decayed beyond recognition, others mummified or still in body bags, bloated and oozing fluids as the stench reportedly spread for miles. Families were unknowingly given cement powder, sawdust, or crushed concrete in urns, led to believe it was the ashes of their loved ones. Marsh claimed the cremation machine was broken, but it was fully functional, leading to him giving bizarre shifting excuses such as the claim that he actually opposed cremation. He eventually pleaded guilty to nearly 800 charges and spent 12 years in prison. Actor David Harbour has been very open about his dark past, particularly his struggles with mental health, alcoholism, and suicidal thoughts. Diagnosed with bipolar disorder at age 25 after a severe manic episode, Harbour was admitted to a mental hospital when he started believing he was receiving divine messages and was possibly the Antichrist. Prior to this, he spent years battling alcohol addiction, which began in his teens and only worsened in college, leading to a life he described as lonely, directionless, and self-destructive. He's admitted to violent emotional outbursts during manic episodes, such as smashing mirrors and feeling like a danger to himself and others. At his lowest, he felt like he was slowly disappearing and contemplated taking his own life. Harbour now credits acting with saving his life since it gave him a way to channel his mental chaos into performance. Now sober and in treatment, he describes himself as someone who enjoys consciousness too much to ever return to his old ways. While filming The 7-Year Itch in 1954, a crowd of over 1,500 New Yorkers swarmed 51st Street to witness Marilyn Monroe's now iconic skirt-blowing scene. As her white dress billowed up with each gust from the subway grate, onlookers reportedly shouted, "Higher, higher," turning the shoot into a public spectacle. Monroe's possessively abusive husband, Joe DiMaggio, was reportedly furious over the display. That night, he physically assaulted her so violently that she filed for divorce just 3 weeks later, citing mental cruelty as the reason. Just recently, American YouTuber Mikhailo Polyakov was arrested after illegally traveling to North Sentinel Island, home to an uncontacted and highly vulnerable tribe protected by Indian law. Known for his danger tourism stunts, Polyakov used a dinghy and GPS to reach the Forbidden Island, where he left a coconut and a can of Diet Coke as offerings while he recorded the encounter. His actions violated strict laws banning all contact with the Sentinelese to prevent disease exposure and cultural disruption. It was his third attempt to approach the violent tribe, and he now faces up to 5 years in prison amid widespread outrage over his idiotic stunt. Standout college basketball star Len Bias was drafted second overall in the 1986 NBA draft, hailed as a future legend and often likened to Michael Jordan for his explosive athleticism. But just 2 days later, while celebrating his selection with friends, Bias collapsed after snorting high-grade cocaine in a University of Maryland dorm room. He suffered a massive cardiac arrhythmia as his heart seized violently and he started convulsing. Despite the desperate attempts to revive him, Bias was pronounced dead within hours. His sudden drug-induced death sent shockwaves through the sports world, forever turning him into a tragic symbol of unrealized greatness. In 2010, 35-year-old Steve Carter made a startling discovery when he found an age-progressed image of himself on a missing children's website. Though he knew he was adopted, this led to the shocking discovery that he was actually Marks Barnes, a child that was abducted in Hawaii in 1977. When he was just a baby, his biological mother had kidnapped him during a custody dispute, changed both their identities, and raised him under a fake name. DNA tests confirmed his true identity, and after 34 years, he was reunited with his biological father, who had never stopped searching for him. Muppets creator Jim Henson's death was made all the more tragic by how easily it could have been prevented. In May of 1990, he dismissed what seemed like mild flu-like symptoms, unaware that his body was actually under attack by a rare strain of Group A Streptococcus. The bacteria ravaged his lungs, filling them with blood and fluid as he slipped into septic shock. By the time he stumbled into the ER, several of his organs were already shutting down, as doctors described it as being hit by a freight train of bacteria. Despite frantic attempts to save him, Henson died at age 53, 20 hours after arriving at the hospital. Medical experts later said that if he had arrived just a few hours earlier, he likely would have survived. In a chilling discovery, archaeologists have found the first physical evidence of ancient Roman gladiators battling wild animals, an 1800-year-old skeleton in York, England bearing lion bite marks on the pelvis. Excavated from Driffield Terrace, a site believed to be a gladiator cemetery, the remains belong to a man aged between 26 and 35. The bite marks on his pelvis showed no signs of healing, indicating that the injuries were most likely fatal. The gladiator was also found to have been decapitated, either as a ritual practice or mercy killing after the brutal mauling. Chandler from Mr. Beast videos suffers from a genetic eye condition called achromatopsia that only allows him to see the world in shades of white, black, and gray. It's a rare form of color blindness where all three cone types are completely absent from the eye, resulting in the inability to perceive any colors whatsoever. Scottish guitarist Les Harvey, known for performing with multiple rock bands throughout the 60s and 70s, narrowly escaped death in a fatal car crash in 1965, only to be fatally electrocuted on stage in 1972 after touching an ungrounded microphone. This gravestone is shared by twin sisters Emily and Minnie Dodsworth. Emily lived for just 2 days, while Minnie lived for over 100 years. In 2003, a Houston doctor stepped into an elevator when its doors malfunctioned and suddenly closed on him. The elevator then shot upward unexpectedly before the man could fully enter, instantly severing his head and shoulders while leaving the rest of his body in the hallway outside. A young nurse inside the elevator was physically unharmed but severely traumatized after she was stuck inside the elevator with the doctor's remains for several hours. Morbid Facts, Part 807. Before he became famous, Vanilla Ice claims he survived a brutal stabbing and a near-fatal nightclub attack. When he was 16, he got caught in the middle of a gang fight in South Dallas and was stabbed 5 times, one wound narrowly missing his heart. Doctors reportedly said the blade came so close that another half-inch would have killed him. Months later, he was nearly beaten to death outside a club after a show, leaving him with permanent nerve damage in his arm. This doll belonging to a 5-year-old girl has been watching over her gravesite since her death in 1912. In April of 2001, 20-year-old Branson Perry completely vanished from his father's home in Skidmore, Missouri. He told a friend he was stepping outside to put a pair of jumper cables into the shed, but was never seen again. His van, wallet, and all personal belongings were left behind. Despite searches, interviews, and 2 decades of investigation, no remains have ever been found and no one has ever been charged. To this day, Branson Perry's disappearance remains one of Missouri's most haunting unsolved cases. Morbid Facts, Part 802. Trailer Park Boys star Mike Smith, best known as the harmless wide-eyed Bubbles, has been charged with sexual assault in Nova Scotia for an incident that allegedly happened back in 2017, a case that stayed buried for nearly 8 years before finally surfacing in court. The identity of the victim is under a strict publication ban, but Smith is now legally barred from contacting them or going anywhere near their work, home, or school. The charge has forced him to step away from the Trailer Park Boys production company, tainting the wholesome persona millions have associated with him. Deep inside a sulfur-filled cave on the Albania-Greece border, scientists have uncovered the largest spiderweb ever recorded, an enormous 106-meter sheet stretched across the cavern's walls. Hundreds of thousands of spiders from two normally rival species have formed a massive cooperative colony, a terrifying behavior never before seen in spiders. The cave's toxic sunless environment created a self-sustaining ecosystem powered by sulfur-eating microbes which attracted swarms of insects, which in turn supplied this spider megacity with endless food. The web is so dense and vast it looks like the cave is wrapped in ghostly white fabric, proof that life can evolve into something terrifyingly efficient when pushed into extreme conditions. Morbid Facts, Part 805. In 1985, veteran Miami Herald photographer Bob East went into surgery to remove a cancerous eyeball, but a tragic hospital mistake killed him instead. During the operation, doctors accidentally injected a toxic preservative chemical into his spine, thinking it was spinal fluid. The chemical, meant to preserve his removed eye, instantly caused brain damage, and East was declared brain dead soon after. He was eventually taken off of life support, while the hospital later admitted the mix-up and paid his family a $2 million settlement. When the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just 73 seconds after liftoff in 1986, it didn't disintegrate immediately like many believe. The crew cabin actually remained intact. For nearly 3 agonizing minutes, it tumbled toward the Atlantic Ocean from a height of 50,000 feet. Investigators later found that air packs had been manually activated, suggesting that some of the 7 astronauts were still alive and possibly conscious during the entire fall. The cabin struck the ocean at over 200 miles per hour, killing everyone on impact. Extra Morbid Facts, Part 69. In 1998, 21-year-old Matthew Shepard was lured from a Wyoming bar by 2 men who pretended to be his friends. They drove him to the edge of town, robbed him, and savagely beat him before tying him to a wooden fence and leaving him to die in the freezing wind. 18 hours later, a passing cyclist found him comatose and barely alive, his face so bloody that he was first mistaken for a scarecrow. Matthew had been pistol whipped and was beaten so brutally that his face was completely covered in blood, except for where it had been partially cleansed by his tears. The injuries were deemed too severe for doctors to operate, as Matthew died 5 days later from massive head trauma. Prosecutors argued the attack was fueled by robbery and deep-seated homophobia, something one of the killers later admitted to. Both men, Aaron McKinney and Russell Henderson, were convicted of felony murder and sentenced to life in prison while narrowly avoiding the death penalty. Morbid Facts, Part 806. In 2023, British TV presenter Holly Willoughby narrowly escaped a fate straight out of a nightmare. Her stalker, 36-year-old security guard Gavin Plump, had been secretly building what prosecutors called a murder kit in his Essex home. Ropes, metal cable ties, chloroform, and knives, all carefully organized for a late-night abduction. He spent over 18 months plotting every step, obsessively saving thousands of images of Willoughby, including hundreds of deepfakes he made to fuel his fantasies. Plum shared his entire plan with someone he met on a dark chat room called Abduct Lovers, where over 100 members spent hours trading violent fantasies. He even sent voice memos describing how they'd hit at night when traffic was low, and how he'd chloroform both of them, referring to Willoughby and her husband. But what he didn't know was that his online partner wasn't a killer, he was an undercover US federal agent. When British police stormed Plum's apartment, they found his computer filled with explicit material, detailed kidnap instructions, and surveillance notes about Willoughby's security routines. He knew her full schedule and had even written down what time she usually woke up. In July of 2024, Plum was sentenced to life in prison with at least 16 years before parole. Artifact Porn, Part 36. Kim Kardashian's 2018 Met Gala photo, taken in front of the gilded coffin of Nedja Monk, caught the attention of the Manhattan DA's Antiquities Trafficking Unit. When investigators looked into the artifact's paperwork, they discovered the export documents were forged and the coffin had actually been looted from Egypt in 2011. The viral photo helped trigger the investigation that ultimately exposed the trafficking network and led to the coffin being returned to Egypt in 2019. When Yoshitaro Shibasaki and his team scaled Mount Tsurugi in 1907, believed at the time to be Japan's final unclimbed peak, they were stunned to find ancient relics already waiting at the summit. A decorative metal staff fitting and a sword were discovered near the top, and later analysis revealed they'd been placed there over 1,000 years earlier. This 250-year-old mechanical swan still glides and bends its neck as if it were still alive. Built in 1773 by master showman James Cox and ingenious inventor John Joseph Merlin, the automaton uses hundreds of hidden clockwork components to make the bird preen, ripple the water below it, and even snatch a silver fish from the stream. In 1835, a man digging a duck pond in Margate, England, accidentally discovered the Shell Grotto, an underground chalk passage decorated with about 4.6 million seashells arranged across 2,000 100,000 square feet of mosaic. Most of the shells, mussels, oysters, scallops, etc. appear to have been collected from nearby Kent beaches, though some are foreign species. Its age, purpose, and creators remain completely unknown. He convinced her he was a 300-year-old werewolf, and it led to one of the most disturbing crimes in Canadian history. In 2006, 12-year-old Jasmine Richardson fell into a secret relationship with 23-year-old Jeremy Steinke, a self-proclaimed 300-year-old werewolf with a history of abuse, drugs, and violent fantasies. The pair openly talked about murdering people, even modeling themselves after natural-born killers. On the night of April 23rd, Steinke slipped into the Richardson home while high and drunk and stabbed Jasmine's mother 24 times, then brutally killed her father after telling him it's what your daughter wanted. Upstairs, Jasmine murdered her 8-year-old brother as he tried to defend himself with a toy lightsaber. Hours later, instead of hiding, the couple went to a party laughing, making out, and laughing about how her little brother gargled as he died. Arrested the next morning, Jasmine became Canada's youngest person ever convicted of multiple murders. She served the maximum youth sentence, had her record completely wiped in 2020, changed her name, and now lives in the community. While Steinke, now calling himself Jackson May, serves life with parole eligible in 2032. Morbid Facts, Part 799. Sports Broadcasting Hall of Famer Marv Albert, long known as the voice of basketball, was one of the most recognizable play-by-play commentators in NBA history. But in 1997, his career nearly collapsed after he was convicted of forcing a woman to perform oral sex on him. Evidence included bite marks matching his teeth and semen found at the scene. Another woman accused him of assault after arriving at his hotel room to find him wearing only silk panties and a garter belt. Albert pled guilty to assault and battery, was fired from NBC, and vanished from broadcasting, only to return less than 2 years later. Despite it all, he went on to call games for decades, still celebrated as one of the sport's most iconic voices. In 2007, 19-year-old Michael John Anderson from Minnesota lured a woman to his home using a fake Craigslist ad for a babysitting job. When 24-year-old Catherine Olson arrived, he shot her in the back, dragged her bleeding body down a staircase, and stuffed her into the trunk of a car, which he later abandoned. When questioned, Anderson chillingly confessed that he killed her simply because he was bored and wanted to know what it felt like. Morbid Facts, Part 800. On November 10, 1975, the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, one of the largest freighters to ever sail the Great Lakes, vanished without a single distress call. She was hauling 26,000 tons of iron ore across Lake Superior, a route sailors today still call the graveyard of the Great Lakes. As a brutal storm ripped across the lake, wind gusts reached hurricane force and waves rose over 30 feet. Nearby ships radioed that the Fitzgerald was taking whitewater over the deck, and her radar was down, vents smashed, and one of her lifeboats already torn apart by the waves. At 7:10 p.m., Captain Ernest McSorley made his final transmission, "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the 729-foot ship dropped off radar completely. When search teams managed to locate the wreck 2 days later, the bow was found buried more than 20 feet into the lake bed, showing how quick the ship plummeted through the water. The crew quarters were crushed flat, showing how violently the ship hit the bottom. So fast, the men never even reached their emergency stations. Divers later found crew hard hats still sitting neatly in their storage racks. All 29 crew members were lost, as not a single body was ever recovered. While the exact cause of the sinking still remains a mystery, many experts believe the Fitzgerald was struck by a rare Three Sisters, a set of massive rogue waves that can swallow a vessel in seconds, snapping the large ship in two and sending all 29 men to their graves 530 feet below the surface. In 1995, divers retrieved the ship's bell, the only piece ever brought to the surface, and replaced it with a memorial bell engraved with all 29 names. Every November 10th, it's rung 29 times, one toll for each life lost. A woman from Turkey recently underwent surgery to have 35 olive pits, 28 date seeds, and 5 stones removed from her digestive tract. She was experiencing severe abdominal pain, leading to the discovery that she'd been swallowing various pits and seeds for decades. After narrowly avoiding death due to the complications, she's now vocal about urging people to never swallow large seeds. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, General Eisenhower was under so much stress that he'd been smoking 6 packs of cigarettes, drinking 24 cups of coffee, and averaging just 2 hours of sleep every day. In the 1950s, 3 campers were found dead at their campsite in Oregon without any sign of struggle. Investigators were stumped until they soon found a dead newt in the hunter's coffee pot. They likely died after drinking the coffee, since newts can produce a toxin that's 10,000 times more potent than cyanide. Ancient Greek lawmaker Charondas issued a law stating that anyone who brought weapons into the Athenian assembly would be executed. One day after hunting in the countryside, he entered the assembly without knowing that his hunting knife was still attached to his belt. He then promptly took his own life to uphold his own law. In 2017, British hairdresser Daryl Rowe was convicted of deliberately infecting 5 men with HIV. He would meet his victims through dating apps before sleeping with them, after which he would send them taunting messages telling them he lied about being HIV negative. Rowe ended up being sentenced to life imprisonment for his evil actions. In 1966, an 18-year-old man entered a beauty school in Arizona before shooting 7 people inside, killing 5 of them, including a toddler. When questioned about his motive, he said he simply did it to get his name out there. Doctor and philanthropist Patch Adams only agreed to the 1999 film about his life because the producers promised to help build his hospital. But none of the profits from the film were ever given to his foundation, and Adams himself said he hated the movie and everything it stood for. In 1955, a pregnant woman was scheduled for a C-section in Morocco, but she fled the hospital after watching another woman die during the procedure. She was in pain for a few days afterwards, but when the pain suddenly disappeared, she simply went on with her life. 46 years later, she was diagnosed with a tumor that turned out to be the calcified baby still inside of her. While on vacation in Bulgaria in 2014, 28-year-old German man Lars Matank got into a bar fight that left him with a ruptured eardrum. He was unable to fly home with his friends due to the injuries, but told them he was totally fine and only planned on staying for a couple extra nights. However, the next day, Lars began acting paranoid. He called his mom and whispered that she should cancel his credit cards because someone was trying to kill him. Security cams in the hotel showed him pacing up and down the halls and peeking out the windows for several hours. After arriving at the airport the next day, Lars saw the airport doctor who gave him the okay to fly. But that's when Lars began shaking and suddenly yelled, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." He then got up and sprinted from the office, leaving behind all of his luggage, including his phone, wallet, and ID. Once outside, he was seen jogging from the airport, hopping a fence, and sprinting in the direction of a nearby forest. Lars would never be seen again. A teenager from Brazil recently died in one of the strangest ways you'll ever hear of. He crushed up a dead butterfly and mixed the remains with water before injecting the liquid into his leg with a syringe. After continuously vomiting and limping several days later, he was taken to the hospital where he stayed for more than a week before eventually dying from septic shock. The boy never gave a reason for injecting the insect into his bloodstream. Up until 2017, if you caught your spouse in bed with someone else in Uruguay, it was within your legal right to murder either one of them. In 1997, struggling father of 3 Billy Bob Harrell Jr. became a millionaire overnight after winning the $31 million jackpot in the Texas lottery. But as friends, family, and strangers continuously pressured him to share his fortune, Harrell's spending went out of control, eventually resulting in he and his wife's divorce. Just 2 years after winning the lottery, Harrell ended up taking his own life just a few days after telling his friend, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me." Cult leader Amy Carlson, aka Mother God, convinced her followers that she was God, a 19 billion-year-old being, and that she could heal people from cancer with the power of love. Amy claimed she had reincarnated 534 times, with her past lives including Cleopatra, Jesus Christ, Harriet Tubman, and Marilyn Monroe. But Amy's health began to rapidly decline after she herself was reportedly diagnosed with cancer in 2020. She was eventually paralyzed from the neck down and begged her members to take her to the hospital, but they refused, and she ended up dying in April of 2021 at the age of 46. When police were alerted, they found her mummified corpse in a state of decay that suggested she'd been dead for several weeks. It was stuffed in a sleeping bag wrapped with Christmas lights, with the face covered in glitter and both eyes removed. Authorities stated it was a makeshift shrine and ended up charging 7 members of the group with desecration of a corpse. As a teenager, the late rapper Big Pun was an accomplished boxer and basketball player. But after dropping out of school and battling depression, he became severely addicted to food. He gained about 50 pounds a year for the next decade before dying of a massive heart attack at the age of 28 while weighing just under 700 pounds. One of the traditional ways to make Okinawan snake wine is quite horrific. It involves putting the snake on ice until it passes out, after which it is gutted, bled, and sewn back up. When the snake is thawed out and reawakens, it quickly dies in an aggressive, striking manner. In 1977, the wife of Melvin Carr arrived home one morning and found her husband dead on the floor in their garage, along with 2 young women and a man dead in the trunk of his car. Police determined that Melvin had kidnapped them at gunpoint the night before, raped the 2 women, and gassed them all with a hose connected from his car's exhaust to the trunk. Melvin had apparently passed out from the toxic fumes upon opening the trunk to dispose of them and ended up meeting the same fate as his victims. In 1966, James Meredith, the first black man to attend the University of Mississippi, planned a one-man, 220-mile march against fear to encourage black people to vote. But despite a police presence just 2 days into the march, James was shot in the neck, back, and head by a white supremacist. He was quickly rushed to the hospital and ended up surviving his wounds, while his attacker only received 2 years in prison. Later that same year, James completed the march, by which point over 10,000 people had joined him. James is now 91 and still lives in Mississippi. Depression-era gangster John Dillinger survived a shootout with the FBI, robbed 24 banks and 4 police stations, had plastic surgery to change his face and remove his fingerprints, escaped from prison using a wooden gun, and led the government on a year-long chase that cost them 4 times the amount he had ever stolen. After Dillinger was finally shot and killed by the FBI in 1934, bystanders rushed to the theater where he was killed to soak their handkerchiefs in his blood, while thousands stormed Chicago's morgue to have their photos taken with his corpse. When Brian Spencer was called up to play in his first NHL game in 1970, he told his father Roy to watch the game that night since he knew he'd be interviewed between periods. But when he couldn't find a broadcast of the game, Roy drove to the nearest TV station in a fury and held the staff at gunpoint, ordering them to broadcast the Maple Leafs game immediately. The station complied, but as Roy was leaving the building, he was confronted by Canadian police and eventually killed after a standoff. The hockey player's life would end up spiraling out of control, as he would also be killed in a shootout after trying to rob his crack dealer. Wow, nice family, huh? During a hunting trip in 1913, race car driver Camille Janatsky hid behind a bush and made animal noises to prank his friend before he was promptly shot. He was rushed to the hospital but died on his way there, fulfilling his own prediction that he would die in a Mercedes. In 1970, U.S. Air Force pilot Captain William Schaffner was ordered to follow a UFO over the North Sea when he ended up vanishing without a trace. A few weeks later, Schaffner's aircraft was found by divers and recovered from the sea. Strangely, its cockpit was sealed and the ejector seat was intact, but Schaffner's body was nowhere to be found. If you were born prematurely, you can thank this man for your life. In the early 1900s, most physicians believed that premature babies were weaklings that were unfit to survive into adulthood and therefore not worth saving. But a sideshow entertainer named Martin Cooney decided to change that with his innovative incubators he called child hatcheries. He would display premature babies at amusement parks around the world through his exhibit called the Infantorium, where visitors could pay 25 cents to view a room full of glass boxes containing tiny babies. Cooney would use the earnings to work with nurses and doctors to do everything he could to keep the babies alive. His goal was to demonstrate to the public that premature babies could be saved with proper care. Through his efforts, Cooney saved over 7,000 lives, and by 1943, nearly every hospital in America had one of his incubators. His work completely changed the public's perception of premature babies and significantly contributed to the development of modern neonatal care. Morbid Facts, Part 538. In 1987, North Korean spy Kim Hyun-hui blew up Korean Air Flight 858, killing all 115 passengers on board. After failing to take a cyanide pill afterwards, she told interrogators it was a direct order from Kim Jong-il that she had no way of backing out of without being killed. The woman was originally sentenced to death, but later pardoned by the South Korean president, who said she was merely a brainwashed victim of the real culprit, the North Korean government. Hyun-hui ended up marrying one of her interrogators, and they lived happily ever after with their 2 children. While recording the audio version of his book Charlotte's Web, it took author E.B. White 17 takes to read the death scene of Charlotte. He's said to have walked outside for a breather, come back in, and started crying again every time he got to that moment. In 1184, the King of Germany was conducting a meeting with his noblemen on the 2nd floor of a church when the floor suddenly collapsed. The king, whose seat was on a separate section that didn't collapse, watched in horror as 60 of his noblemen drowned in the cesspit located below that hadn't been emptied out in years. Children's entertainer and YouTuber Stephen John, aka Blippi, hasn't always been so family friendly. He began his career as a gross-out video creator under the name Steezy Grossman, and would post shocking videos of himself performing grotesque acts across illicit websites. Most infamously, he performed the Harlem Shake in 2013 while standing unclothed on a toilet and defecated all over his unclothed friend. Despite Steven's regret and extensive efforts to have the video removed from the internet, it can still be found rather easily. Don't try to find it. Please don't. Oh my god, why did I watch it? What the fuck, Blippi? In 2013, unemployed 30-year-old Princeton graduate Thomas Gilbert Jr. shot and killed his hedge fund manager father just hours after being told his $1,000 weekly allowance would be cut down to just $300. He was sentenced to at least 30 years in prison. A Japanese pilot who bombed a town in Oregon during World War II returned 20 years later to present his family's 400-year-old sword as a symbol of regret. His daughter said that if he'd received a negative reaction, he would have used the sword to perform seppuku on himself instead. In 2006, 26-year-old Illinois teacher and wrestler Samson Shelton admitted to police that he raped a 17-year-old student before choking her and tossing her body into a wooded area. He then put a belt around her neck to make it look like she was strangled and left her for dead, after which Shelton went line dancing with friends. Suffering from brain damage and a broken neck, the teenager survived but had to relearn how to swallow, walk, and talk. But despite his heinous crimes, Shelton was released on parole just last year after serving out 17 of his 20-year prison sentence. In 2008, a train traveling 70 miles an hour struck and killed an 18-year-old man who was running across the tracks and apparently didn't realize how fast the train was moving. The impact flung the man's body over 100 feet, and his flying body parts knocked a 58-year-old woman to the ground, breaking her wrist, shoulder, and leg. The woman later sued the man's family on the basis that, if you did something as stupid as this guy did, you have to be responsible for what comes from it. Iconic actor Jack Nicholson has faced his fair share of legal controversies over the years. In 1996, he reportedly assaulted an unnamed Hollywood socialite at a party and ruptured her breast implants. Then that same year, he allegedly promised a prostitute named Catherine Sheehan $1,000 for sex and then assaulted her when she asked for the money. Sheehan claimed that Nicholson promptly grabbed her by the hair, thumped her head on the floor, and then threw her out of his house. She received a $40,000 settlement, but later argued that this was insufficient to cover her injuries, including brain damage, which she said was actually killing her. In 1849, Henry Box Brown escaped from slavery by shipping himself in a small wooden crate from Virginia to Philadelphia. Despite the instructions on the box of handle with care and this side up, carriers placed the box upside down or handled it roughly several times. 350 miles and 27 brutal hours later, Brown stepped out of the box a free man and went on to become a magician. When later asked why he went to such an extreme to escape slavery, Brown was quoted saying, "If you've ever been deprived of liberty as I was, you cannot realize the power of that hope of freedom." Just 2 days after his 18th birthday, star football player Warrick Dunn lost his police officer mother in a fatal shooting while she was off duty. But despite this, Dunn raised his 5 siblings while in college and was selected as the 12th overall pick in the NFL draft. He's since funded and built over 150 homes for single mothers, using his wealth to improve their lives. In 2008, suspected serial killer Ricky Simmons was found dead of heat stroke in the trunk of his ex-girlfriend's car. Investigators believe Simmons was waiting in the trunk to ambush and murder his ex-girlfriend when he became locked in the vehicle. A few years after receiving a bone marrow transplant to treat his leukemia in 2019, Nevada man Chris Long discovered that the DNA in his blood and semen had been completely replaced by that of his donor. Long had essentially become a chimera, a person with 2 different sets of DNA. He was quoted saying, "I thought it was pretty incredible that I can just disappear and someone else can appear." Experts say this was an extremely rare case, but one that raises serious questions about forensic evidence at crime scenes. In 2012, tragedy struck when 30-year-old newlywed Maria Pantazopoulos was having some trash the dress photos taken in Montreal while wearing her wedding dress. She was only standing in about a foot of water on a river when her gown became waterlogged, quickly pulling her deeper and deeper underwater as her dress suddenly weighed up to 100 pounds. The photographer did everything he could to save her before Maria cried out, "I can't anymore, it's too heavy," and then she let go. Her body was recovered by a scuba diver 2 hours later. In 2008, a college student from Belgium decided to heat up some leftover spaghetti that had been sitting out on the kitchen counter for 5 days. He told his parents that it tasted strange, but figured it was the new tomato sauce that he added to the pasta. After eating the entire bowl, he headed out to play some soccer but had to return home 30 minutes later while suffering from severe abdominal pains, headaches, and nausea. He then vomited for several hours before finally managing to fall asleep, but he never woke up. The man's lifeless body was discovered the next morning after he died from an extreme form of food poisoning known as Bacillus cereus, aka fried rice syndrome. When he was a young boy, actor Terrence Howard witnessed his dad stab a man to death while they were waiting in line to take pictures with Santa Claus at a department store in what became known as the Santa line slaying. The victim, who was also with his family, reportedly made a racist comment to Terrence's father Tyrone after he thought he cut the line, which quickly escalated to a fatal fight. Tyrone was arrested and pleaded self-defense since the other man attacked first and was sentenced to 11 months in prison. After a deadly Peruvian avalanche in 1962, 2 American climbers traveled down to investigate and later warned Peruvian authorities that there is a threat of a much larger avalanche just waiting to happen. These warnings were not only ignored but actively suppressed by the Peruvian government, as the climbers were accused of fear-mongering and anyone who even mentioned their research was arrested. 8 years later, the deadliest avalanche in history occurred there, completely destroying the town of Yungay while killing over 30,000 people. In 2021, Lady Gaga's dog walker Ryan Fisher was walking 3 of her French bulldogs in Hollywood when he was suddenly attacked by 2 men. After being shot in the chest, which resulted in permanent damage including the partial loss of a lung, he still tried to protect the dogs, but 2 of them were taken. Gaga later offered a $500K reward for the return of her pets, and 2 days later, a woman brought the dogs to an LA police station. The woman was later arrested along with 4 others in connection with the crime and tried to sue Gaga for not paying the reward money, asking for the $500K plus another $15 million for financial damages, pain and suffering, mental anguish, loss of enjoyment of life, and legal fees. She claimed that she never would have returned the dogs if not for the promised reward, and was therefore defrauded because she ended up with no dogs and no reward. The woman ended up losing the case, while shooter James Jackson pleaded no contest to attempted murder and was sentenced to 21 years in prison. Virginia Giuffre became one of the most prominent victims of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell when she fearlessly accused Epstein and Prince Andrew of repeatedly sexually assaulting her when she was a teenager in the early 2000s. But just today, the 41-year-old mother of 3 reportedly posted on Instagram claiming she only has 4 days to live after her car was struck by a school bus. Along with an image of her appearing badly bruised, Virginia wrote, "This year has been the worst start to a new year. I won't bore anyone with the details, but I think it's important to note that when a school bus driver comes at you driving 110 kilometers per hour, that no matter what your car is made of, it might as well be a tin can. I've gone into kidney renal failure and they've given me 4 days to live. I'm ready to go, just not until I see my babies one last time." The post has left people asking many questions, with some believing it to be a sick April Fool's joke or a cover-up for the fact that she was actually murdered. In 2016, Star Trek actor Anton Yelkin died in a freak accident at the young age of 27. After pulling into his driveway in his Jeep Grand Cherokee, Yelkin went to check his locked gate for mail when the car suddenly rolled back down the driveway and pinned him against a pillar connected to the gate. It's unknown how long it took for the actor to pass, but he was found dead by friends hours after he failed to arrive at rehearsal, and the official cause of death was blunt traumatic asphyxia. Yelkin's particular car model had a known design flaw that confused drivers about whether it was properly in park, and was later recalled due to faulty gear shifters. If you think you have high cholesterol, this guy will make you feel a lot better, or should I say, a lot butter. A Florida man in his 40s followed an extreme carnivore diet for 8 months, consuming nothing but beef, butter, and cheese. He often ate entire sticks of butter and several pounds of cheese each day, causing his total cholesterol to skyrocket to over 1,000 milligrams per deciliter, while anything over 200 is considered high. As a result, he developed painless yellow cholesterol nodules on his palms, elbows, and the soles of his feet. Despite this, the patient said he felt great following the diet and was able to lose weight while significantly improving his energy levels and mental clarity. Morbid Facts, Part 796. Pop icon Britney Spears has lived through one of the most disturbing public downfalls in modern celebrity history. After a 2007 breakdown that saw her shave her head and attack a paparazzi's car, she was placed under an involuntary psychiatric hold, and shortly after, her father gained full control of her life through a conservatorship that lasted 13 years. During that time, Britney claims she was drugged, forced into rehab, and even denied basic freedoms like driving, marriage, or spending her own money. Even after regaining her freedom in 2021, Britney has described the trauma as something that crushed her soul, leaving her forever haunted by the years she spent as a prisoner of her own fame. This driver was extremely lucky they lived in Australia, where cars are right-hand drive. At just 9 years old, Louis Joseph Xavier, the oldest son of King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, suffered a fatal injury after a fall. He admitted he'd been pushed but refused to name the culprit, afraid they'd be punished. The wound became infected and he died in agony soon after, but never ratted on his friend. His death shattered his parents. Both would be executed just 2 years later, as the monarchy he was meant to inherit completely crumbled. Morbid Facts, Part 804. Food influencer Michael Duarte, known online as Food with Bare Hands, built a massive following by grilling, cooking, and feeding strangers with his bare hands. But on November 8, 2025, his life ended in shocking fashion during a family trip to Texas. Police responded to a disturbance call involving a man reportedly acting erratically with a knife, and Duarte was fatally shot by deputies on the scene. Witnesses later described the moment as chaotic and heartbreaking, with his family present during the incident. The tragedy struck just 3 days after he and his wife celebrated their 9th wedding anniversary. In the immediate aftermath, Duarte's talent agency and family had presented his death via a GoFundMe campaign as a horrible accident, without initially disclosing police involvement. The family has since asked for privacy and support, as funeral arrangements are made and efforts to return his body to California proceed. Duarte was only 36 years old and leaves behind wife Jessica, daughter Oakley, and millions of fans who watched him turn simple meals into moments of kindness and generosity. Morbid Facts, Part 798. In 1996, 31-year-old Canadian man Blair Adams suddenly became convinced someone was trying to kill him. He abruptly withdrew his life savings, emptied his safety deposit box of gold, cash, and jewelry, and made several frantic but failed attempts to leave the country. After being denied entry to the US, he inexplicably abandoned his construction job in Vancouver, flew to Washington, D.C., rented a car, and began driving aimlessly across multiple states. Witnesses described him as paranoid and agitated, constantly checking over his shoulder and telling strangers someone was after him. Days later, his naked body was found in a Knoxville, Tennessee parking lot, his clothes torn and scattered around him, along with $4,000 in cash, gold, and jewelry, none of it stolen. An autopsy revealed he had sustained many cuts and abrasions consistent with a struggle, and a violent blow had ruptured his stomach, causing sepsis and eventually death. Yet there was no weapon found, no DNA evidence pointing to a killer, and his car keys were found tossed under a nearby vehicle. Hotel staff recalled him pacing in the lobby the night before as if waiting for someone. Nearly 3 decades later, Blair Adams' death remains one of the most baffling unsolved cases in North America. This was the final footage of Sandra Cantu before she was brutally murdered by someone everyone trusted. In 2009, 8-year-old Sandra Cantu vanished from her trailer park in Tracy, California after heading out to play. While police suspected a male predator who had touched Sandra before, the real killer was someone nobody expected. 28-year-old Sunday school teacher Melissa Huckabee, whose daughter was Sandra's friend. When Sandra went missing, Huckabee immediately inserted herself into the case, texting Sandra's mother strange messages about something being stolen at the exact time Sandra disappeared, and even claiming she found a note describing Sandra locked in a suitcase and tossed in the water. But witnesses had already seen her near an irrigation pond that same day, looking frantic and making a flimsy excuse that she had to pee before speeding off. Surveillance footage soon sealed her fate, showing Sandra walking toward Huckabee's trailer at 3:54 p.m., and Huckabee's SUV leaving the area just 8 minutes later. Police searched the church where she taught and found a rolling pin with a bent handle and a smear of Sandra's blood. Investigators believe Huckabee drugged Sandra, beat her up, sexually assaulted her with the rolling pin, then smothered and strangled her before stuffing the body into a suitcase and dumping it in the pond where it was recovered 10 days later. The seemingly trustworthy Sunday school teacher never explained why she killed her. Prosecutors suspect a twisted Munchausen-style urge for attention, someone willing to murder an innocent child just to make herself part of the tragedy. Morbid Facts, Part 797. In March of 2019, rising Liverpool indie duo Hers were in the middle of their first US tour when tragedy struck. After performing a packed show in Phoenix, 24-year-old Stephen Fitzpatrick and 25-year-old Alden Lauding began their overnight drive to California with their tour manager. Just before 1 a.m., their van was hit head-on by a pickup truck driving the wrong way on Interstate 10. The collision erupted into flames, killing all 4 men instantly. Investigators reported no signs of braking and found an open container in the wrong-way driver's wreckage, suggesting alcohol may have been involved. Just hours earlier, the band had posted that their U.S. tour was going swimmingly and that they were almost home. Their debut album, Invitation to Hers, would become their final record. In 2012, a Pennsylvania tree worker named James Valentine was trimming branches high off the ground when his chainsaw suddenly kicked back. In an instant, the blade plunged deep into his neck and shoulder, stopping just millimeters short of severing vital arteries. Miraculously, the chain jammed before it could spin further, but the saw itself remained embedded in his flesh. First responders found him conscious with the chainsaw still lodged in place and carefully stabilized it as he was airlifted to a trauma center. After hours of delicate surgery, doctors successfully removed the saw and repaired the massive tissue damage. Against all odds, Valentine made a full recovery. Morbid Facts, Part 801. Victoria Wright was born with cherubism, a rare genetic disorder that causes the bones in the lower face to grow erratically, giving her a swollen, distorted appearance that drew cruel comments from strangers her entire life. The condition can be extremely painful by tightening the jaw, straining the facial nerves, and making basic things like chewing or even speaking very difficult at times. As a child, she endured constant looks, bullying, and even adults snickering about her in public as if she wasn't standing right there. But instead of hiding, she turned her diagnosis into a mission, calling out the cruelty she faced after a BBC documentary sparked a wave of online abuse, and becoming a fierce advocate for people with facial differences. In 2015, Mary Cerruti vanished from her Houston bungalow without a trace. 2 years later, the new owners found her skeletal remains sealed inside a wall along with her glasses and shoes. Investigators believe she fell through the attic floor and became trapped, slowly dying alone in total darkness with no way of climbing out. But because she was one of the last homeowners refusing to sell as developers closed in around her, many people still suspect something darker. Her official cause of death remains undetermined. Scientists in Germany have captured something incredible on camera for the first time ever. They recorded wild rats snatching bats straight out of the air in total darkness, an unbelievable hunting behavior no one had documented before. Since rats have poor eyesight, they rely on their highly sensitive whiskers to detect subtle changes in air pressure and movement, even the faint air currents from a bat's wings. Researchers believe this eerie adaptation is what allows them to hunt in complete darkness, and the finding may also help explain why bat-borne illnesses like coronaviruses are spilling over into rodent populations. Deep in the Guyanese rainforest, Kyatur Falls is nearly 4 times taller than Niagara. Its remote location means few people ever get to see it, and the surrounding cliffs host rare species found nowhere else on Earth. Beautiful, ain't it? NASA's New Horizons spacecraft captured this amazing footage of Pluto during its flyby in 2015, revealing frozen plains, towering ice mountains, and an unexpectedly active surface. The footage offered the first close-up look at Pluto in human history, and completely changed our understanding of the distant dwarf planet. Insane Crimes, Part 4. In 2001, U.S. border agents at the Mexican border discovered 42-year-old Enrique Aguilar Canchola sitting inside a hollowed-out passenger seat that had been modified to look completely normal. He'd been sewn into the seat to sneak into the U.S. undetected, but agents noticed the seat looked unusually bulky and pulled the car aside. Canchola was immediately arrested along with the driver. In 1980, the FBI set up a fake company to expose corrupt politicians, and 25% of the congressmen who were offered bribes accepted them, leading to multiple convictions in one of the largest stings in U.S. history. In 2025, South Carolina teaching assistant Alexander Lewis was arrested after repeatedly spraying a powerful fart spray inside of West Florence High School, triggering nausea, headaches, and respiratory issues among students and staff. The odor contaminated parts of the building's ventilation system, forcing inspections and cleanup that totaled more than $55,000 in damage. Lewis was charged with disturbing schools and malicious injury to property, turning what he thought was a harmless prank into one of the most expensive school incidents of the year. Morbid Facts, Part 803. Ariana Grande's life has been marked by unimaginable tragedy. In 2017, during her concert at Manchester Arena, a suicide bomber set off an explosive as fans were leaving the show. 22 people were killed, some of them children, and hundreds more were injured. The tragedy left Ariana with PTSD and deep survivor's guilt, something she said she'll never fully recover from. Just a year later, she lost her ex-boyfriend Mac Miller to an overdose, a loss that left her completely shattered. In 2019, she revealed how deeply those experiences affected her, sharing a brain scan that showed severe patterns of trauma, comparing it to a healthy brain and one with PTSD. Hers lit up the same way as the trauma scan, as she called it hilarious and terrifying, not a joke. In the years since, fans have noticed a drastic change in her appearance. Her once soft features now look sharper and hollowed, her frame thinner, her face at times hauntingly fragile. Whether from stress, age, or the weight of everything she's endured, Ariana's transformation feels like a visible reminder of how much she's had to carry. In honor of Veterans Day, these are some of the most badass soldiers in American history. After 9/11, NFL safety Pat Tillman turned down a multi-million-dollar contract with the Cardinals to instead join the U.S. Army. He served several combat tours in the Army Rangers before he was tragically killed by friendly fire in the mountains of Afghanistan. Prior to his death, Tillman called the invasion and occupation of Iraq effing illegal. During World War II, Native American Joe Medicine Crow completed all 4 feats required to become a war chief: touching an enemy without killing him, taking an enemy's weapon from him, leading a war party, and stealing an enemy horse. He overachieved on the last one by stealing 50 horses from the Nazi SS, singing a traditional Crow honor song as he rode off. In Iraq, Sergeant Major Bradley Kazal was shot 7 times in the legs and ripped apart by 43 grenade fragments after throwing himself over a wounded Marine. Even with both legs shattered and bleeding out nearly 60% of his blood onto the floor, Kazal kept firing his M9 pistol, killing at least one insurgent while dragging his men to safety. The infamous photo of him being carried out while still gripping his pistol became one of the war's most iconic images and later inspired the No Man Left Behind statue. Kazal survived after 21 surgeries and the loss of 4 inches of bone from his leg. After a brutal battle in Vietnam, Master Sergeant Roy Benavides had 37 puncture wounds, exposed intestines, and a broken jaw. He was pronounced dead until he spit in the face of a doctor who was zipping him up in a body bag. Benavides went on to fully recover and was later awarded the Medal of Honor. In 1944, American Private Edward Orange was found clutching a sword while surrounded by 13 dead Japanese soldiers. Barely hanging on to life, his last words were, "I guess they didn't know I was a Marine." In Afghanistan, Marine Kyle Carpenter saw a grenade land between him and another Marine. With no time to run, he threw himself on top of it, taking the full blast to his face and torso. The explosion blew out his eye, collapsed his lungs, shattered his jaw, and stopped his heart as medics initially thought he was certainly dead. After more than 40 surgeries, Carpenter somehow survived, becoming the youngest living recipient of the Medal of Honor. During World War II, American Lieutenant John Fox died after deliberately calling an artillery strike on himself. Realizing that German troops were overriding his position, the strike delayed the enemy long enough for other American units to organize a counterattack that ultimately won them the battle. Hugh Redman was an American paratrooper who later spied on communists in China for the CIA. He was captured in 1951 and endured 19 years of brutal torture since he refused to reveal who he worked for. Most likely murdered by his captors, his ashes were sent home in 1970, and he was given a headstone that read, "His country above all else." In Iraq in 2009, Sergeant Dakota Meyer disobeyed a direct order to pull back from his position. Instead, he entered an area that was under heavy fire so that he could rescue 4 wounded soldiers. He ended up going back 5 times and saved the lives of 36 men, later saying, "That's what you do for a brother." Meyer would become the first living Marine in nearly 4 decades to receive the Medal of Honor. During World War II, American Private Thomas Baker was gravely wounded by the Japanese but refused to give up the fight. He ordered his squad to leave him propped up against a tree with nothing but a pistol and 8 bullets. He was later found dead with the empty pistol and the bodies of 8 Japanese soldiers scattered around him. In the Vietnam War, American sniper Carlos Hathcock volunteered to crawl for 3 days across 200 meters of open field containing an enemy headquarters, took a single shot that killed an NVA general, then crawled back out without being seen. Legendary sniper Chris Kyle became so feared in Iraq that insurgents called him the Devil of Ramadi and put a $20,000 bounty on his head. With 160 confirmed kills, his shots were so lethal that enemy fighters reportedly warned each other not to step into sunlight. His most famous kill came from over 1.5 miles away, dropping an insurgent carrying an RPG before he could fire it. Kyle survived ambushes, IEDs, and close-quarter fights that should have killed him, only to be murdered back home by a Marine he was trying to help. While filming the 1972 film Napoleon and Samantha, 9-year-old Jodie Foster was mauled by a substitute lion on set. The big cat picked Foster up, shook her around like a rag doll, and only released her when its trainer yelled, "Drop it." Foster later said she was in shock and thought it was an earthquake as she watched the rest of the crew run away. The same lion had nearly mauled Bob Denver while filming an episode of Gilligan's Island years earlier, and shouldn't have been anywhere near a film studio afterwards. Foster still has scars on her stomach and back from the incident and has suffered from severe ailurophobia ever since. Almost immediately after being liberated from concentration camps, an estimated 14,500 Holocaust survivors died from refeeding syndrome, since their bodies couldn't process normal food after such prolonged starvation. During the back surgery of a Hawaiian man in 2006, the surgeon couldn't find the 2 titanium rods that were supposed to be implanted into the man's spine, so he decided to improvise by implanting the shaft of a screwdriver instead. The screwdriver eventually snapped, and the man died 2 years later following 3 more corrective back surgeries. The patient's family was eventually awarded $5.6 million in a malpractice lawsuit. On a cold winter night in 1977, 48-year-old Teresita Basso was found brutally murdered in her Chicago apartment. Her body had been left naked under a burning mattress with a knife still embedded in her chest. The case quickly went cold with no suspects and no apparent motive, until months later when police received a chilling phone call. A local man claimed that his wife, who had worked with Teresita, began channeling messages from Teresita's ghost during trance-like states. During these eerie episodes, the woman would apparently speak in Teresita's voice, identifying her killer as a man named Alan Showery. Even more disturbingly, the alleged spirit named stolen items that were taken from her apartment, including specific pieces of jewelry that Showery had stolen from her. As absurd as it sounded, police followed these clues, and shockingly, they all checked out. Showery was arrested and eventually confessed, making this one of the most bizarre criminal cases in modern history. In 1966, a teenage boy was flying a kite in Brazil when he stumbled upon 2 dead bodies lying in the grass. Later identified as electronics technicians, the men were wearing matching formal suits, raincoats, and most bizarrely, homemade lead masks covering their eyes. One of them had a note in his pocket that read, "Be at the agreed place at 4:30. Take capsules after the effect. Protect metals. Await signal." There were no signs of violence, and no clear cause of death was ever determined. The capsules were never found, and toxicology reports proved inconclusive due to organ decomposition. The men had been seen acting nervous and paranoid in the days leading up to their deaths, while reportedly measuring distances in the hills and carrying around a notebook filled with strange codes and symbols. Their families later stated that the men had been obsessively studying obscure books on alchemy, spiritualism, and intense luminosity experiments. Their bizarre deaths remain a total mystery to this day. In 1963, Frank Sinatra's 19-year-old son Frank Jr. was kidnapped from his hotel room in Lake Tahoe and held for ransom. He was released 2 days later when his father agreed to pay the $240,000, and the 3 perpetrators were captured and arrested soon afterwards. But the kidnapping had a lasting traumatic impact on Frank Sr., who began carrying dimes in his pockets everywhere he went, since the kidnappers demanded all communication be done through payphones, and Frank was concerned that one day he wouldn't have enough change to call them. It became such a habit that the legendary singer was even buried with 10 dimes in his pocket after he died. In January of 1993, Texas attorney David Glenn Lewis planned on watching the Super Bowl alone at home while his wife and daughter were out shopping, but when they returned, there was no sign of him. They found freshly made sandwiches in the fridge, David's laundry in the washing machine, and David's watch and wedding ring on the counter, but no David in sight. The next night, a man was killed in a hit-and-run 1,600 miles away near Yakima, Washington, and 11 years later, the body would be identified as David Glenn Lewis. How David ended up 1,600 miles away so quickly and the circumstances surrounding his death remain total mysteries to this day. Mel Blanc, the voice of Bugs Bunny and many more, started smoking at age 9 and changed his name from Blank to Blanc after a teacher told him he would amount to nothing just like his name. He was once involved in a head-on collision at a Sunset Boulevard intersection known as Dead Man's Curve, a spot notorious for accidents. The crash resulted in a 2-week coma, and he was completely non-responsive until a doctor decided to ask him, "How are you feeling today, Bugs Bunny?" Blanc then responded to him in the voice of Bugs, and thus woke up from the coma. This also happened in the middle of production for season 1 of The Flintstones, for which Blanc was the voice of Barney Rubble. So during his stay in the hospital, the other actors would crowd around his hospital bed to record their lines. Around 40 episodes of The Flintstones were recorded in this manner. After the legendary voice actor died from heart disease and emphysema in 1989, his tombstone read, "That's all, folks." In 2000, 4-year-old Qian Hongyan survived being hit by a speeding truck driver but had to have both of her legs amputated. Sadly, due to her family's financial struggles, she couldn't be provided with prosthetics and instead had to improvise with half of a basketball. She became known as China's basketball girl, a symbol of resilience despite overwhelming odds. A few years later, her story went viral and she was offered free prosthetics by a hospital in Beijing when she turned 11. A pair of identical twins from Brazil would use their resemblance to impersonate each other and date as many women as possible, and then defend themselves from allegations that they were cheating on their girlfriends. They would even take turns having intercourse with the same women by routinely swapping with each other without the women knowing. After one of them got a woman pregnant and a DNA test was inconclusive when both twins refused to say who was the father, a judge ordered both of the twins to pay maintenance to the little girl. The judge said they were taking away from the girl's right to know who her real father was. When the 2-year-old daughter of Chelsea Camp was being mauled by a vicious pit bull, the Texas mother had to act fast. She jumped on the dog's back and bit off its ear before shoving her fist down its throat to save her little girl. Both suffered serious wounds from the dog, which belonged to Chelsea's boyfriend and was normally very friendly but suddenly turned on the toddler. The pit bull was still attacking when police arrived and had to be euthanized. In 2007, a Rhode Island hospital was fined $50,000 and reprimanded by the State Department of Health after brain surgeries were performed on the wrong side of the patient's head 3 separate times in the same year. During the mating process, dogs and other canines get stuck together for anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour. It's a natural physical mechanism called a copulatory tie where both of their genitalia interlock to ensure fertilization. The first time dogs mate, they're often surprised by this and show signs of distress while trying to pull away or run. A man from Vietnam had endured severe headaches for 5 months before finally going to the hospital. After a CT scan, the man and his doctors were shocked to find that a pair of chopsticks were lodged in his skull. It turned out that the man had been involved in a drunken fight 5 months prior that he barely remembered, and somehow ended up with chopsticks deep up his nose as a result. Despite having no prior acting experience, 12-year-old Kevin Clark was cast as drummer Freddie Jones in the cult classic School of Rock. Sadly, he died in 2021 at the age of 32 after being fatally struck by a car while riding his bike in Chicago. In 1978, 134 Chinese sailors were killed because a Navy lieutenant broke up with his girlfriend. After being dumped, she took her own life, leading to the man being discharged from duty pending the investigation. So while raging on his last voyage home, he decided to detonate the charges on the ship, causing it to sink while killing 134 sailors on board. Scientists have conducted studies where they transferred gut bacteria from schizophrenic humans to mice, resulting in the mice exhibiting schizophrenic behaviors. This suggests a potential link between gut health and the development of mental disorders. In 1997, 50-year-old Massachusetts woman Judy Smith was in Philadelphia with her husband when she told him she was going out sightseeing in the city, but she never returned. Months later, her body was found in a forest 600 miles away in North Carolina wearing different clothes and a new backpack. She had been mysteriously stabbed to death, and her killer remains unidentified to this day. In 1915, a strange illness called encephalitis lethargica broke out across the globe. Nicknamed the sleeping sickness, the disease attacked the patient's brains, leaving them frozen in a statue-like state, fully conscious but unable to move or speak. One of the most haunting aspects of this disease was its unpredictability. Some patients recovered quickly, never experiencing any long-term effects, while others went into a deep coma and never woke up. Then there were patients who seemed completely recovered, until years later when the illness came back and suddenly turned them catatonic. At least 500,000 people died from the terrifying disease before it vanished without explanation 10 years later, just as suddenly as it appeared. While many theories have been put forth over the last century, epidemiologists still remain haunted by the mysterious sickness and its unknown origins. Some say it never left, but still lingers in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. When Jim Morrison died in France at the age of 27, no autopsy was performed as it was not required by French law. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but several witnesses say he actually overdosed in a nightclub bathroom and his drug dealers carried his body to his apartment bathtub. However, these claims couldn't be verified without an autopsy. During the siege of Leningrad, the city was blockaded by Nazi Germany for 872 days. Food supplies were so scarce that people resorted to eating wallpaper paste and even boiled leather from furniture. In the worst cases, cannibalism was documented by people digging up corpses and consuming them. Despite this, the city never surrendered, and about 1 million civilians died during the deadly siege. In the year 897, Pope Stephen VI had his dead predecessor, Pope Formosus, dug up, dressed in papal robes, and put on trial simply because the new pope hated him. They propped his decayed corpse on a throne, screamed at it, and found him guilty since he obviously had no defense. Formosus was stripped of his papacy while his corpse had 3 of its fingers cut off before being thrown in a river. The public was horrified by this grotesque trial, as Stephen VI was soon imprisoned and strangled to death. Formosus's body was later recovered from the river, reburied with honors, and his papacy was eventually reinstated by a later pope. In 1989, 56-year-old Ole Benson laughed so uncontrollably while watching a fish called Wanda that he went into cardiac arrest. His heart rate reportedly spiked to over 300 beats per minute before he died at the movie theater. In 1814, a massive vat at a London brewery suddenly burst, sending 300,000 gallons of beer surging through the streets in a devastating flood. The torrent destroyed homes and claimed the lives of 8 people, including 5 mourners who were attending the wake of a little boy who had drowned just a day prior. One of those victims was the boy's mother, who was still holding her child's coffin when her body was found. A woman undergoing pancreatic surgery was accidentally set on fire after alcohol-based sanitizer met an electrical scalpel. Her body ignited in seconds, and she died from severe burns after doctors tried to put her out with a bucket of water. In 2011, a 16-year-old girl from China had been dealing with chronic headaches for years and finally decided to get them checked out. Doctors were shocked to find a fully formed tumor containing hair, bone, and multiple teeth, likely the remnants of a parasitic twin inside of her skull. It had been pressing against her brain tissue, and the headache stopped upon its removal. Here's a photo of some children who were part of the 1980s Australian cult called The Family. The group was run by Anne Hamilton Byrne, who believed she was Jesus, and illegally adopted 28 children before raising them in total isolation. All were given the surname Hamilton Byrne, the same clothing, and the same haircut and dyed hair color. The kids were imprisoned, routinely drugged with LSD, and brainwashed into believing that Anne was their real mother. They were denied nearly all access to the outside world and subjected to a strict discipline that included starvation diets and frequent beatings. During all of this, the children were told that they were part of a chosen group of superior beings who would survive an impending apocalypse and eventually rebuild and lead the new world. The compound was eventually raided in 1987 after a member escaped and blew the whistle on the cult, but Anne managed to avoid jail time, only paying a measly $5,000 fine due to a lack of concrete evidence. When Pope Pius died, his embalming was so poorly botched that his body began to rot and bloat almost immediately. During the public viewing, his nose fell off, and his body reportedly exploded from the gas buildup inside of the casket due to blistering heat. After being killed in a shootout in 1911, outlaw Elmer McCurdy's embalmed body was mummified and passed around as a carnival sideshow prop for more than 60 years. His corpse was finally identified in 1976, when a TV crew realized that the mannequin was actually a human body. In 2007, a 53-year-old woman died from a stroke, and her organs, both kidneys, lungs, and her liver, were donated to 4 different patients. Over the following months and years, all 4 recipients developed breast cancer, from which 3 of them ended up dying despite treatment. It was later found that the donor had breast cancer that hadn't been discovered at the time of her death. The only survivor had their donated kidney removed early before the cancer could spread. Doctors have said this was an extremely rare case that shouldn't deter anyone from receiving donated organs. Lee Redmond held the world record for the longest fingernails at 28 feet in total length after growing them out for more than 30 years. She said she had to sleep in a special uncomfortable position and couldn't drive because of them. But she eventually lost them after she was ejected from the passenger seat in a 4-car pileup that resulted in serious injuries. For 60 years, an unknown figure dressed in black visited Edgar Allan Poe's grave on his birthday, January 19th. Starting in the 1930s, he would pour himself a glass of cognac and raise a toast in front of the grave, before leaving behind 3 roses and the unfinished bottle of cognac. The man never spoke and was never identified. In 1942, forest rangers discovered something disturbingly odd at a lake located high in the Himalayas. There were over 200 ancient skeletons with blunt force trauma to their skulls, but the strangest part was that they were from distinct populations that died about 1,000 years apart. Researchers say the lake may have served as a recurring death trap over the centuries, with many likely dying from sudden hailstorms, which explains the cracked skulls. Many of the skeletons can still be seen emerging from the thawing ice in the summer, some with their hair and flesh still intact. A 27-year-old beauty queen from Kosovo has reportedly died after attempting to flee from police. Güler Erdogan allegedly tried driving home while drunk until she ran into a police checkpoint. After a breathalyzer recorded her BAC as 3 times the legal limit, she decided to flee from the scene on foot, fearing that her modeling career was over. She ran over to the edge of the overpass and reportedly fell over by accident, plummeting 50 feet onto the 6-lane motorway below before she was fatally struck by a car. In 2012, a woman from South Carolina discovered that her ex-boyfriend of 12 years had been secretly living in her attic for several weeks. She'd been hearing strange noises and nails dropping from the ceiling of her bedroom, before eventually sending her nephew to investigate, who found the man sleeping on the attic's heating unit. The ex-boyfriend had also rigged the ceiling vents to apparently look into the woman's bedroom from above. Upon discovery, he fled the scene before police arrived but was later apprehended. Just last year, Nicolas Cage's son Weston was arrested after reportedly assaulting his mother, Christina Fulton. The woman says she rushed to Weston after hearing he set his apartment on fire, but upon her arrival, her furious son snapped, violently pulling her into an elevator by her hair before crushing and suffocating her. Fulton testified, "He shoved his thumb into my eye socket. The pain was excruciating. My vision went black. I was losing consciousness." She credited one of Weston's friends with potentially saving her life by intervening before the attack got too ugly. Weston was recently ordered to complete a 2-year mental health diversion program instead of serving prison time. In 2007, a man named Shannon Wisnant bought a storage unit at an auction in North Carolina, only to find a severed human leg when he opened the grill inside. He reported this to authorities, but soon decided he wanted to keep the leg and turn it into a money-making Halloween display for adults and children to pay to see. However, the man who the limb once belonged to caught wind of the story and said it was his own amputated leg that he lost in a plane crash and wanted to be buried with someday. After a long custody battle, the leg was eventually returned to its original owner. In 1988, Iranian man Mehran Karimi Nasiri was traveling to the UK when his briefcase containing essential refugee documents was stolen from him at a Paris train station. Unable to prove his identity to British immigration officials, Nasiri was returned to France and found himself completely stranded in Terminal 1 of Paris's main airport. He remained there for an astonishing 18 years, during which he became a fixture in the terminal, residing on a red bench surrounded by his belongings, writing in his diary, and engaging with airport staff and travelers. In 2006, Nasiri was hospitalized, finally ending his long stay at the airport. He later lived in a Paris shelter before returning to the airport in 2022, where he would spend his final days before dying of a heart attack in the same terminal. His unique situation inspired several works, most notably the 2004 film The Terminal, directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Tom Hanks.